Good afternoon, friends. Wishing you all a very, very happy new year on behalf of the Jamiti team. And today we all have got together for our next session of Jamiti Placemaking dialogue series. And today is going to be a very interesting topic on people, places, and stories. And the panel also today is a great speakers consisting of Saurav Roy. He's the founder of Roy Studio, and also he's a partner at The Switch. And he's also the founding member of Placemaking India. So, welcoming him. And our second speaker for the day is Roshni Desai. She's the founder and creative director at Local. This is a exclusive design studio, branding and design studio in Mumbai. And to moderate the session, we have Mr. Firdaus Bariawa. He's the vice chairman of Bombay of Bharat Flooring and Tiles, which is a very reputed brand, reputed firm in Mumbai. And also would like to thank our knowledge partners, Vinita of Placemaking India and Urban Jam for partnering this sessions. And would like to welcome you all. And for the attendees, would like to just remind that please put your questions for the speakers in the chat box, and these will be addressed at the end of the session. So thank you so much all and welcome again. And I would like to invite Mr. Firdaus now to take it on from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimple. And thank you for inviting me to be the host of this panel discussion. So happy to be here. So your introduction of our panelists was so brief, and I thought I'll just do a little bit more of an introduction and really tell people why these are such renowned figures in the field of placemaking. So let me start off first with Saurav Roy. He is a graduate of the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad, and he founded two studios with his partner Upasana Natoji, which is Roy Studio and the Switch Studio. Roy works with brands, organizations, and places in the areas of design and place branding. And Switch Studio works at the intersection of art, design, and technology to build powerful narratives and experiences. So Roy has been working with entrepreneurs, developers, and planners for the past 17 years in helping build local context to places through branding, wayfinding, and experience design. He is one of the founding members of Placemaking India. Some of these include placemaking programs in luxury lifestyle centers with several leading companies such as Virtues Retail, Blackstone, and Lakeshore across 15 cities in India. He is also the creator of Knot and Tuft, a design platform for collaboration between designers and artisans to recontextualize the tradition of handmade carpets. He's also the co-founder of Half Fry, which is a monthly workshop-style conversation that curates audiences and creators from various fields to talk about their processes and their passion. Basically, all I can say is that Roy does kick-ass branding work and makes every client love him to bits. So with that short introduction of Roy, let me now go on to introduce Roshni. So Roshni Desai is a designer and creative director with 12 years of experience. Her expertise is bringing in local stories and cultural knowledge and insights into brands. She has a master's degree in graphic moving image from University of the Arts, London, and a bachelor's in mass media, advertising from Mumbai University. Her previous work experience spans global media companies like MTV, Saffron Brand Consultants, Landor Associates. She was the design lead at Eros Now and Culture Machine. She taught graphic design at Ecole Institute Lab and a summer course at London College of Communication. She has been mentored by industry stalwarts like Michael Wolff, Wally Ollins, Jonathan Ellery, and Rodney Fitch. She has also been interviewed by BBC Radio, Design Indaba, Vogue India, France 5, and Great Big Story for her work. And I would also like to say that she also won Best Woman Director and People's Choice Award for her graphic film Cover Up, which also screened at the 39th Asian American International Film Festival in New York. So basically about Roshni, we can summarize and say that she has the knack of taking local brands and bringing them to international levels thanks to her global work experience. So, with that, I would request you to get, you guys are on the screen, and I
Absolutely.
was reading the text. So, I'm so happy to see you guys, and I hope my introduction wasn't wrong in any way. You can correct that now.
It was amazing,
Roy,
Firdaus.
Roy, let me start off with you.
Sure.
Can you please give us a 10-minute introduction to your work through a PowerPoint slide and tell us a little bit more about branding and placemaking as you see it?
Hi, Firdaus. Lovely to be here, especially in a session moderated by you. And it's especially special because this is the first edition of Urban Jam of 2021. And very happy to be with Jamiti Hub on this. So let me pull up a small deck, which I'll sort of run through my perspective on some of the work that I've been doing over the years in placemaking. Vishala, you might just bring up the presentation. Is the screen visible? Great. So the perspective really comes from the idea that places are pretty much as physical as they are conceptual, and they exist as physical monuments as well as they exist in our memories in terms of our ideas of what the spaces are as well. And our collective imagination, in that sense, is also shaped by what we see and hear. And today, with our total immersion in social media, the perception of a space is shaped by so many other things apart from its actual physical environment as well. An interesting example of this is actually I'm not sure if everyone's heard of this. There's actually a specific syndrome called the Paris syndrome, which is faced by Japanese tourists who, when they see Eiffel Tower, they literally face depression on seeing the difference between what they thought what the Eiffel Tower would be and what the reality was as well. And interestingly, this is really where branding and identity sort of comes into place because it helps in shaping and creating these collective imagined spaces. Some of the ways in which it does is through the identity of the place, it's through signage and wayfinding and art and communicating community programs. And these are some of the areas that I'll talk about the kind of work that I've been doing over the years. A little bit of background. I'm the co-founder of Roy Studio and of Switch. These are two studios which work in two similar fields. Roy Studio works with place brands on the experience design. Switch works on the narrative side of the process. And one of the large areas of work that we do is sort of, and which we feel very passionately about, is about how do we sort of create identity for all of these spaces, whether it's public, private, and all community spaces, which are built from our local narratives and context. And in some sense, I think we are really lucky to be born in a place like India, where we have such a rich diversity of both visual styles and forms. And my focus has been to see that when we are sort of creating these brands and identities of these places, and we create something which has a sense of our own place and our own sort of, space in the universe. So I'll run through three areas of work. One has been in private public spaces, largely in lifestyle centers, and how we sort of worked into creating a pride in the community. The second is in heritage spaces, how in heritage spaces the identity really helps in define the place as well. And the third is in community and its produce. And that's a little off from placemaking, but I think it's still relevant in terms of creating a sense of the larger place. So, with public and private spaces, I've had the opportunity over the years to work with several private players, real estate developers, private equity funds. One of them was Virtuous Retail, in which I led a couple of place branding programs when I was the design director of Idea Spice. And these are three, and I'm going to show these as three examples. These were three projects, one in Surat, one in Bangalore, and one in Chennai. So interestingly, the objective was that how do we make sure that when there is a center which is there in Surat, because this is designed as a lifestyle and community center. So it also blends in not just commercial aspects, but also community aspects as well. Uh, can we create a very strong sense of pride in the city, and which is celebrated through the center itself? And as a process, one of the ways which sort of worked really well and what we defined was the idea of creating a culture map of the city. And this sort of, in a sense, became a template for several other projects going ahead as well. So the culture map really defines what makes the city unique, what are its little quirks, and what are the really things which sort of add character to the city. And the culture map, in that sense, helped define a whole lot of right from the graphic language to the visual language and to the personality of the center. So one of the areas which sort of became the anchor point of the placemaking program in the center was this 300-foot wall, which depicted the whole entire history of Surat, starting from Akbar's time to recent developments as well. And the interesting thing with these kind of places are that, in a sense, there are private places because there are retail centers, there are retail shops, there are commercial spaces as well. But there are also large open spaces which tend to become sort of public in nature. And when these places, which are public in nature, tend to celebrate the city, the culture, and the local context, the result is in some sense almost magical because it sort of instills a deep sense of pride within the community itself. And one of the things which was interesting about where the center was located was it was right in front of Tapi River, where an annual Magdala boat race is held every year. And one of the things which was done at the inauguration of the center was a really large installation of the winner of last year's Magdala boat race called, and this became an installation called the Jal Tapi, which was also hand painted by the artist Paresh Mehti. And this is an example where, typically in a mall, you have a large atrium space. Now, rather than create an art installation which is could be from anywhere in the world, if it really celebrates what's happening in the neighborhood, in fact in their case right in their doorstep, it recontextualizes the entire event, and it sort of brings it into a completely different perspective altogether. From there, this allowed us to create a dramatic language which spelled out right from whether the housekeeping uniforms, the communication, and all the other collaterals. So the identity really sort of stemmed from having a very, very strong local context. The other one was in Bangalore, which was in Whitefield. And similarly, when we created a map of Bangalore, the idea of the center really was a celebration of Whitefield. And though Whitefield today is known as the IT hub of India, a very large part of its history is actually that it was one of the first oldest Anglo-Indian settlements in India. And there were tremendous amounts of stories that were dug out right from the time when Winston Churchill had visited Whitefield. In fact, there's a whole local folklore that Winston Churchill had fallen in love with the innkeeper's daughter, and apparently there's a tree where there's WC loves the girl's name carved in somewhere. And a lot of these stories is what we realize is what the center would celebrate, and that in a sense became the anchor point for all of these. So the timeline in which was there in Surat was recontextualized and created in sort of a different format over here, but it sort of fulfilled the same purpose. It fulfilled the purpose of uh, giving a sense of pride to people of where you are situated and where you're located and all the things that have happened around it. Art programs also help quite a bit in sort of defining this, and this is one of the art installations I designed, which is based on the Chenna Patna toys. And the center, in that sense, became a celebration of everything that is Whitefield. So, right from the naming of the different places to the design of all of these areas, it became a celebration of Whitefield as a space. The anchor point for Bangalore was obviously a pub called the Whitefield Arms, which became a repository of all the different stories that were dug out. And one interesting installation which was done was really a commemoration of the original bungalows in Whitefield, most of which don't exist anymore. So we sort of dug out the names, created an installation which was having the names engraved in brass plates. And this really sort of was, in some sense, to me, uh, it was a realization that there are tremendous amount of stories in all our cities and all our neighborhoods which tend to get lost, and they either are lost because people just simply don't know, or they're lost because they're not being used or they're not being told anymore. In Chennai, that's where a huge amount of effort was put in to sort of see that we are able to sort of tell all of these and articulate these stories really well. And similarly, the culture map of Chennai captures what Chennai as a city is and all its different quirks and all of its different characters. And obviously, it's 100-year-old history. The timeline which exists in Surat and in Bangalore was translated into these large stone carvings on wall. And there are 4 entrances to the center. So each entrance depicts a certain period in Chennai and Tamil Nadu's history. And interestingly, today there's a culture walk which happens in the center, which then sort of reinforces and talks about all the different stories that Chennai as a city has. And this also allows us to create a strong and unique language that is then carried across, and it sort of gets reinforced in different areas as well. This was the leasing center which was designed, which used the translation of the graphic language, and several art installations were also designed which then sort of celebrated all of these as well. Signage, interestingly, also then plays a role, because signage then becomes a part within this larger macro system and then starts depicting the stories. And one of the my first work with the craft sector actually stemmed with Chennai a couple of years back, where we sort of worked in creating this dramatic atrium design with wraparound mural of depiction of the Samudra Manthan. And this was fairly large in scale. I think, as you can see, those are people there in the balcony. And this sort of also led me to another path of understanding that there's this very strong and rich visual history and culture which is there, which can be recontextualized and used in so many different ways as well. And the other area is also where placemaking and place branding works, is to sort of work in creating bringing the heritage alive. Heritage spaces, in that sense, while they will preserve and bring about the stories alive through different areas as well, the branding of that place also contributes in so many different ways, because it sort of starts creating a very strong visual image and a visual brand of that place as well. This is a project proposal that we had done for the Belapur Fort along with Kiran Kimaya architects. And this sort of translates the design language and the ethos, and the principle behind which the reinterpretation work is going on at the Belapur Fort, into an identity form. And this is celebrated through right from your merchandise to signage system to all of these different areas. And little bit off from the placemaking per se, but one of which was an offshoot from the craft work in VR Chennai. There is also the larger sense of place that is rooted in its identity, which is not necessarily anchored to one specific point, one specific location, but in also to the entire region per se as well. And this is one area that we've been working very closely, especially the last year, with a large artisan and crafts community in India through 2 platforms, Creative Dignity and Hand for Handmade. And one of the areas where this has sort of grown fruit is in work with a brand called Taru Naturals, which works with local communities to create a strong organic marketplaces. And the idea was that the packaging then sort of depicts, and the products themselves depict the nature and the character of the place. And there's no better way of doing it than through the rich art and culture and heritage that we have in India, which is really, really diverse. And there's a specific design and a design language in every region in India. So that's where this has gotten translated into a rich language, which is now used across in packaging and communication, a whole lot of different ways as well. And another precursor to is, in fact, is something that we'd worked along with Firdaus, is the idea of the sense of identity of India and the India as a place itself, and how it can also be very strongly tied down to its craft. And craft, when it's celebrated through design and it's sort of put in a modern context, also helps in shaping the narrative of what we are perceived as well. So this is BFT Home, which was a really, really fun project which we had worked in with Firdaus. And the idea was to sort of look at Indian craft as the origin point of a whole lot of different products, and to really talk about different regions and creating the regional identity through these products as well. And so we worked along with BFT on a whole lot of different products in the home and lifestyle spaces. And it ended up creating some really interesting products and interesting designs that helped in recontextualizing all of these. And that's what my perspective is on people, places, and stories. And I know as the sort of placemaking and especially in placemaking programs, identity becomes one of the key anchor points. It sort of has the power to sort of help bring all the different aspects and narratives together into a strong visual system, which can then be used to communicate in so many different platforms apart from the physical space itself. So that's my presentation. I don't know if I'm above 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes. Back to you, Firdaus.
Thank you, Roy. That was really, really astounding, the amount of beautiful work you've done. And really appreciate the little project you had done with us as well before you moved to Goa. It was wonderful working with you. I'm now going to call upon Roshni to show us some of her beautiful work and her idea of what constitutes branding and placemaking. So, Roshni, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Firdaus. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And sort of, your work is so inspiring, and I'm so happy to see designers pushing the way design should in India, and this pride with that we have for an Indian culture and how much there is already in our world to sort of and not look outside of India, right? I'm going to start sharing my screen. Just let me know if you can see. I hope that's visible. All right, great. So yeah, a little bit. I am quite new to the world of placemaking, but the way I've entered this sort of universe of local design is really when I was approached by Jamiti, I think I realized how important this conversation is. And a little bit about me, I have had 12 years of experience. I think Firdaus gave a great introduction to me, so I'm not going to go deeper into my background, but I've had experience working for a lot of brands, branding studios, across the world. And one thing that always bothered me is that Indian brands really, really need to package themselves better, and the way we have so much visual culture and storytelling in India, and that never gets sort of its due, especially in the Indian context. I run a small studio called Local, based out of Mumbai. And when I started off, I think the main focus was that I wanted to work for companies that wanted to change the world, right? Who kind of wanted to make a change from, which were rooted in the local, but affecting the global. So the idea is, every single company has to have that, if you want to sort of go higher than where you are, if you are sort of telling the truth of your local context, and then that's when you can really reach sort of global heights. Here what we do at Local is we work on strategy and research, brand design, and then we also do the rollout and creative direction. So everything from sort of thinking of the brand to the entire experience of the brand. And so our motto overall in Local, I don't know how many of you know about this design. There's a design sort of rules which says form and function makes design. But what we believe is the secret sauce to any good design is culture. And I think today I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, because that really is the DNA of what we should be talking about in placemaking and in design in general. So I would say that my focus has sort of been the idea of decolonizing Indian design, right? A lot of people, we've been told what graphic design and messaging should be, and what internationally looks good, and then you come to India and you see India's visual culture, which is so diverse, and it's so different. And then there was always this sense of, almost loss of pride that I felt people would in India would feel, and students, especially when I'm teaching, and the idea is to bring back that sense of pride in Indian visual culture. So coming back to sort of what design is, right? Design is problem solving, right? Fine, basic problems. I want you guys to look at a couple of pictures, the next few pictures, and tell me what you think is the problem. So this is all branding. These are big brands, multi-million dollar deals. They have so much money to pump into a market. They're telling you advertising. They have the world at their feet. They have the best locations to be shown at and everything. And this is what we see, right? This is design, but this is design problem according to me. And the reason this is a problem is because design is about communication and about sort of giving character to a place. Each of these guys are looking at their own brand and they're thinking of themselves in isolation, but no man, no brand is an island, right? You are existing in a cultural context. You live in this universe, and I think all of these brands are sort of ignoring that, right? So that seems to be the problem here. And so if we just said, okay, design is form plus function, so the form is there and it's creating the functions, telling you about the messaging, but it's missing culture. And this is what I want to get at. So what do we mean by that? What do you mean missing culture? How do you even do something like this right? And so I found some beautiful examples. So the Jaipur Bazaar has this amazing way of having the signages of each of their shops. You can read all the signage. It's giving you the form and function, but it's also respecting the culture around it. It is talking about the context it lives inside, right? And similarly, if you look at the amazingly beautiful and quiet signage system that the Red Fort has, if you even the iconography has been like taken from what you see around you. So nothing is out of place. It is communicating, it is messaging, it's storytelling, everything, but without being noisy, without creating visual pollution. And it is kind of balancing the whole idea of form, function, and culture. And I think that's what sort of I want you guys to think about. So my thought is, I mean, this is of course a hypothesis, but having worked with brands in the UK and stuff, I realized that when a designer in Germany or UK who was designing the Vodafone brand sat down and created the Vodafone store frontage rules, this is the sort of street he was thinking of, right? A gray street, and where the red of the logo and the Vodafone signage just pops out and looks smart, and it doesn't scream, but it's sort of gives you a message. However, when a brand like this comes to India, this is what happens, right? It's not respecting the context it lives in, and suddenly everything around it is screaming, and so is the signage, and suddenly it doesn't make sense anymore. And my sort of practice and push has been to kind of question these things, right? So when I ask you guys, right, so okay, we say the secret sauce is culture, but what forms culture? I would ask this question, but I think we're quite short in time here. So of course, music, movies, shows, your monuments, traditions and rituals, people you meet, stories you hear, smells you experience, food you eat, presentations of things. Overall, culture is how you were made to feel, right? And whether you go to a person's home, whether you go to another country, do you go to a city, culture is that feeling, that intangible kind of quality that you get, which is a sum of every experience you've had there and how the feeling you go away with. And I think the bigger issue right now with placemaking is people will see ads of India, read books about India, but when they come to India, it doesn't look like what they thought it would look like. Sort of what Saurabh was talking about, the Paris effect, right? There's this romanticized idea. And how can we bridge that gap is sort of where, the question of design lies. So designers do have a cultural responsibility, more than you think. And I think we as designers need to sort of take that up, but also I think we should be put in positions where we can make those calls, take those decisions, and help sort of shape that narrative. And so I've been asking a bunch of questions, right? Which has, what is Indian design? What are the differentiators? Why is Indian, when you look at Indian design, why is it called a craft and not design, right? There's so many different problems right now with the genre of design in India, and it gets very confused. And so I started local, the studio, and we've been doing, a lot of work with brands, and all the work that we do is borrowed from things we see around us. So what we do, instead of going on the internet and looking at brands abroad, we walk around our areas. We do something called local walks, and we sort of catalog a lot of imagery and type and visual culture to see what is India's way of talking. What does the color red and orange mean to us? How do we balance color? How do we talk, and how do we type? What does typography mean to us, right? And so we actually we literally take from what we see and we create that into branding. And I'm not going to go deep into my work, but we've used those kind of learnings throughout our processes while building all of our brands. And the brands have been across, this is a social brand for sort of tier 2, tier 3 cities, to teach young girls about sexual health. This is a brand, it's a restaurant. This is another restaurant where it was about, we kind of studied the history of pre-partitioned India, and the restaurant sort of wanted to hark about, bring back sort of food that was lost when the partition happened. There was a very peculiar amalgamation of food, and we kind of wanted to bring those flavors in. So there's a lot of storytelling, and we dug out a lot of old stories and there's also something called the Museum of Material Memory that we partnered with, where people who had left during partition, what are the few objects that they brought back when they left their home. And I think that became, the sort of look and feel of this brand. We did Tribe, which is, a brand which was born out of the tattoos of different tribes in India. And just sort of using visual storytelling from what we see around us. This was a taxi that was designed to talk about women's safety in the public space. And, again, placemaking. Can the place actually travel across the city? Does it have to be a static place? And then this was a project I had done back in the day when I was a young designer early in my career, which I think changed my life. We traveled across the state of West Bengal, and we did the branding of the state of West Bengal. This is before, during the communist government time, and they wanted to talk about, Shobha Bangla, which is everyone's Bengal. And we traveled for a month. We shot hundreds and hundreds of photographs, and that became the brand. And just the experience of talking to villagers and small school teachers, and like how they want to communicate about their state. We were asking them to tell us what they think their state stands for. And it was a beautiful experience, very enriching, and I think sort of led me to do what I do today. I also like to teach, and kind of, I think when I teach, I learn so much. So also I did this talk with a very diverse bunch of kids back in my college in London. I went back to teach, which was amazing. I taught about how to bring your culture into graphic design, and that was so interesting to talk to people from different parts of the world, who how they see their culture, and how to kind of help them find their way into design. How do they inject that? Because it's also, this is a big jump. There's a lot of looking down upon, especially non-colonial cultures, right? And so in 2020, after doing all this studio work, I decided to make a little shift, because I was like, it's still not enough, And so what we did was we created a lab and a community along with local. The lab started, and within the lab we have a repository where we collect a lot of visual data which we see around us, very much like the local box that I showed you. And then out of the repository comes projects, and the projects are built from stuff that we want to bring through community. So not just people, not just the overall community, but also the design community in particular. We're harnessing them to kind of create projects that help push the idea of design in India, and what how can we make this outside inside connection, right? And our sort of missions are, we've got like 6 missions for labs. It's one is research and study local. Second is to experiment and push. Third is to make important information visible. Fourth is to solve real problems, because design often just does pretty things but doesn't solve anything. Archive and guide, because we need to collect all that. There's just so much visual history and culture in India, and nobody has ever written a book on design and graphic design in India. So I think that one of the big ones is that. And then, of course, lead by example and hope that more people start doing what we are trying to do here. And so one of our first projects was in collaboration with this amazing German designer and who's running something called Open Collab, and he has this platform where you can auto-generate posters, and we got it was amazing. We got 350 designers to log in for a period of 8 hours, and we created 5 lakh unique posters online, all during the middle of COVID. Nobody had to step out their house, and we created this crazy community of designers who would just apply. So basically, people would keep uploading layers, and then these posters would get generated, and that was just an amazingly magical experience. The second project that we're currently running is called the Indian Graphic Design Story, which is more about, sort of documenting what Indian design is. So we kind of take one topic, like a graphic topic, like Indian graphic murals, political murals, and sort of do a whole analysis about them. We do interviews, we do, we actually break it down and kind of try to understand the sort of from a scientific perspective what a political mural is. And same thing with the Indian candy graphics, and what are the colors, what are the common rules. So because graphic design has traditionally always been seen from a European perspective, and those rules have become sort of the law, we are trying to say, hey, here are Indian rules. This works for us, and we love it, and we've grown up with this stuff. And so, we're trying to standardize and create a sort of documentation of all this stuff. And so labs is ongoing. There's a lot of more plans for the future for it. But in summary, I would like to say that India is a treasure trove of visual stories. And it's a brand that already exists. We don't have to create the Indian brand. It just needs to be cleaned up and designed thoda sa pyar se and beautifully wrapped up. And yeah, I think that is sort of what I would like to end with today.
Wonderful, Roshni. Really, really love seeing all that. And the work is beautiful, and really the depth of thinking that goes into all your work is astounding. Amazing. I think everyone's loving the Vodafone example. A lot of comments coming up on the Facebook talking about the how they really relate to it. So I think with that, can we have Roy back so that we can have a freewheeling discussion about placemaking? So let me just start off with a couple of questions. Can we talk about the importance of celebrating local stories? And I think let me start with Roy. I mean, do you have any, what is the importance of celebrating local stories according to you, Roy?
So I think like specifically in India. So when we're saying celebrating local stories, I think we do see it in context of celebration of design places, because in India, our everyday culture, our stories are celebrated in so many different ways, right? Whether it's food, whether it's the kind of the festivals and all of the things which are sort of happening around it. But these, especially when it comes to built places and sort of environments, that's where there is a disconnect with the local context and a disconnect with the place. So you suddenly see, let's say, I mean, a park, for example, in Mumbai, it's designed beautifully, but it's designed in a way that it's obviously supposed to resemble a European park, but has no context with Mumbai and the kind of places that we are in, for example. So the importance of celebrating our stories and the importance of celebrating a local context really is about making, in a basic sense, it's about making it usable. And it also sort of starts instilling a sense of pride in our everyday environment. So
True.
there is a I feel there is a slightly especially I think predominantly because of Instagram and obviously Pinterest as well, there is this aesthetic in a visual sense, which slowly and slowly starts getting borrowed by seeing what people are doing everywhere else across the world, and then sort of trying and replicating it. But the first step of any design process is finally empathy. So if you're not really sort of empathizing and understanding the local context and not building around it, I feel that's a huge opportunity loss. So an example, for
Wonderful.
instance, is the Jal Tapi installation in Surat. I'm not sure if Anupam is online as well, but it was Anupam who had sort of initiated it from BR Surat, and it was a wonderful idea to celebrate a boat race which happens just right behind. And this is a boat race which has been happening for like years and years and years, and it is known to the local community, but no one outside Surat knows about it so much. And even though it's a beautiful festival, so the minute you're celebrating that festival or putting up an art installation in a mall which is in that neighborhood, it starts creating a new kind of conversation. And it obviously creates a conversation with a deeper connect with the local community. So the opportunity which is sort of is getting lost if you don't celebrate your stories is you're not able to connect with the community for whom you're building things clearly.
Correct, correct. With that, I also wanted to ask Roshni the same question, and I think Roshni has gone backstage. So, Roshni, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you feel is the importance of celebrating local stories?
So the thing is, I think locus means storytelling is the most memorable way to sort of build recollection, right? Like any brand, anything in the world, if you remember it via stories. And so, and especially India, it's like there are stories in every community, every culture, every corner. In fact, there will be, local stories about even a small mohalla in your neighborhood, right? Little bit, यहाँ पे ना ये हुआ था और ये there was this one lady who should live here and this Devi. And all of that kind of stuff is what creates urban culture. And
Right.
sometimes I feel India is overwhelmed with it, and which is why people find it difficult to choose stories. But I think the importance of story, like Sora was saying, right? It's so important to talk about it because A, if you don't, it gets lost. B is if you don't, the sort of the stuff that you come hearing about, and then you don't
Mm-hmm.
see that story in real life. Like suppose you come to Bombay, knowing saying okay, there's a Bombay is the house of jazz. It was the sort of pinnacle of jazz in India. And then you come to Bombay and you don't really see jazz anywhere, and there is no story about it when you come there, and that sort of creates a lot of disappointment. So I think it's about firstly having that. Of course, there are a lot of books. Like I said, India is great with storytelling in the sense that people have romanticized and
Hmm.
written about it, but I don't think on ground that story is coming alive. And like I think maybe one example is what Saurav is saying, have these sort of things
Yeah.
in public spaces. But I think there's so much more that can be done to kind of have that continuation, so that when you arrive here, you kind of that story continues and you become part of that story. And I think a lot of sorry to I don't want to compare, but a lot of European countries do that really well. That story continues when
That's
you
very
come.
true.
You
That
come
is
to
so
France,
true.
you see a plaque, and you
When you
see
go to any spot in Europe or some of these countries, even the most meager story is told in such an interesting way and presented so well, you just feel like it's worth that trip. Whereas here you'll go to some historical place, it's ancient and it'll be like a dump. And there'll be
yeah,
some archaeological survey of India wala board and
one paragraph. That's it.
you really don't understand what the hell it's just amazing the difference. So let
Yeah.
me continue the same on the same vein, Roshni, and ask you for a further question that how do we select the stories that should be told about that space?
Hmm.
Like because there are so many stories that you could pick from. So how do you select the most powerful? I mean, what is your method and how do you select the most powerful stories?
So I think, see, that's a very tricky one, but it's also, I think it's the story. I don't think it's about which stories you select. It's more about first figuring out how you want to tell the stories, and then I guess it's also like which stories stick in the mind. So suppose I know that this story is running a lot. Like people say you have an incredible India campaign and you've heard about boat racing or you've heard about the kite flying or whatever, and people have come for that. Make sure at least they get that bare minimum, right? Like make sure there is some sort of plaque,
Mhm.
some sort of installation, maybe some sort of a tour that makes you see all the stuff that you're saying. So it's about, I think, which story to choose. I think the story chooses itself. people choose the story. That's the fun part about stories, that people kind of hook on to things, and that's the beauty of it. Like there'll be some bizarre stuff that people start to hook on, and then I think the role of designers and branding people like us is to take that and make it into an experience, and make it, highlight it, and embellish it, and make it beautiful to present it back to the people.
Super. Let me also ask Roy the same question. Roy, when you are creating a space, how do you pick the stories that you want to tell in that space?
So I think it really depends upon the context of what that place is, right? So, for instance, if it was, I think there's a huge comment which just got tagged in.
Yeah.
So I think it really depends upon the context, right? And the thing is that I mean, we all know, right? India is a land of stories. So there is I mean, every neighborhood, every corner is a story. Our festivals are celebration of stories. Our everyday culture is stories. So the way I would sort of look at it is in the context of the place and where it's being used, right? So obviously, if it's a heritage space, the kind of stories it needs to talk about is to celebrate the history. But if you're opening, let's say, a restaurant, for example, in a part of town, maybe you want to celebrate all the quirky stories which are there. So there are several different ways in which you can choose stories, and I think we are in a period of time where this is a very tricky kind of a question, right? What stories are edited and what stories are propagated as well. And I think therefore it is I think everyone's responsibility to see that all stories are being presented, all stories sort of come out through, and
But that will end up being
I
very
mean
confusing, I think.
no, not really. I mean, in the sense that, I mean, if you take, say, I mean, like the example that we were discussing, right? For example, in European countries, there is a defined and a very curated sense of history and heritage, etc., which is put on display. India, in that sense, thrives on chaos. I mean, uh,
Hmm.
there is. I mean, I live in Goa and you live in Bombay, right? So we really know what chaos means and how we sort of navigate our way through. But that's really what makes us. We are not ever going to sort of be a deferred sort of follow a different model. For example, our model needs to be uniquely Indian model, and it needs to be sort of us. So it might be chaotic, it might be a lot of times over the top, but it is finally us.
Right.
I also think, Roy, it's also about balance. And Fidos, I think that's what he was saying, because in India, because there's so many opposing views, right? Like, if, for example, in Germany, in Berlin, if you go, there's a whole walk about the Holocaust. There's like so much about the Holocaust.
Yeah,
Now, obviously, the Germans are very embarrassed about it, but there is a conversation, that all kinds of
Right.
conversation are existing about it, which is what I think what you're saying, right? Sort of, even in
yeah,
India, there's so multicultural. You cannot look at one story in its one angle. You have to make, if you take a top rather than story, I would say take a topic. Say it's a heritage structure, or it's the farming or the food of India, whatever, and then you look at it from different angles, and then it's about stories rather than a story, right?
That's
So
a yeah, that's a very interesting way of thinking about it.
very
Also,
well.
like,
Yeah.
should we talk about a little bit about what is the difference between branding a public space versus a private space? And if you want to even talk about how we can brand two areas of the same building, because like for instance, a mall has a private space which is the shop, and then you have the public space which is the atrium and whatnot. So like if you guys would like to weigh in on that, maybe Roshni, you can start with that. Public versus private.
hmm.
How do you tell
um,
the stories, or how do you treat the areas differently?
I think with public, there's a much more bigger responsibility. With private, it's because it's been brief. You've been given a brief, right? Like private, the owner wants to talk about certain things, or once has a certain thing that he wants to highlight and talk about. But with public, it is like, like I said,
Hmm.
it has to be a very balanced view. It is where a lot of people are going to come and have opinion, and it's a gift back to society in a way. So I think that way the approach is very, very different. In a private, it becomes much easier, because you're just following a brief, and then you kind of say, okay, within this brief, let me not give you, yes, you do, generally. So this is what happens. Generally, the brief I would get is, we want a cafe like Paris, okay, like a cafe in New York or Paris. Here's a mithai shop. And I said, okay,
Right.
your brief is a cafe in Paris because you've seen the cafe in Paris. can I reinterpret that brief saying, it means you want the level of a cafe in Paris, but you're okay with talking about mithais in that level, right? So how do we bring that international charm of a cafe in Paris, but talk about the Indian context of it? Bring it in
Right.
because many of these things haven't existed. So I think the job of a lot of us designers has been about asking them to take a leap of faith and kind of creating these new experiences. And I agree to a certain extent that we lie in chaos, but I think there's a need, just for the sake of communication, to clarify and clear up and make some very easy to understand brands and spaces, both privately and publicly. I don't know if that
Super.
makes sense.
Roy, what about you? What's been your experience in branding private versus public spaces?
So I think
And how do you treat them?
there are no branding of public spaces at all. I mean, public spaces branding typically in India, really don't exist. We don't have iconography for our famous monuments, for example, which is standardized and used across in all of these places. Branding in private spaces, I'll agree with Roshni, is a lot simpler because you're working around a very defined context, a defined brief, and a defined purpose. But branding in public spaces to me really should be about the community and the place that is there, and it has to be able to sort of work around with it, whether it's through creating an identity, but it has to be able to give back to that community. And so the function of branding in that sense goes beyond sort of creating just a logo or a visual identity, etc. It also sort of starts to build an emotional connect with the people with it as well. In a private space, you can sort of, you can either be, you can either create an emotional connect, or you can be esoteric and sort of do something quirky. You have a lot more opportunities and options as well. But
Right.
in branding in public spaces, I think there's a lot more responsibility which is there, and therefore needs to be done a little bit more carefully.
So when we look at all these spaces, how do we create the emotional connect with that space? I mean, that is essentially the whole purpose of branding and placemaking, is to actually create that
Yeah,
emotional
yeah,
connect. So what are
yeah.
some of the things that people can do to create that emotional connect?
So, in my experience, one of the ways in which it has been is signage and wayfinding, interestingly, can play a tremendous amount of role because it has. I think we desperately need a lot of signage in India, which guides people as well, because we are so used to just asking people for directions. But I think signage is a crucial component in most of our public spaces as well, and it can therefore also fulfill another function just beyond guiding people. It sort of starts
Right.
imparting a character as well. The other is art programs. I think art programs have a tremendous. I mean, it's good to see a lot of public art programs in India now, but I think we have a long way to go, considering the kind of rich culture and heritage and the repository of talent that we have in India. I don't think we're doing anywhere close to enough to sort of have them adequately represented, especially on this platform. Most of the art programs, etc., are by famous artists or someone from abroad. But I think we have a lot more talented people over here in India itself. Uh, the third program is really, I think it's food. And as Indians, we love food. And I think F&B, food and beverage, plays a very, very important role in sort of, interestingly, to sort of impart a character to the place. Right. So, I mean, Firdaus, where your office is, right? I mean, you literally can map out Bombay according to the kind of chai
Yeah.
walas there and the kind of food that you get on the street, and that's a different kind of mapping altogether.
Very true.
And the other is festivals, and we love to celebrate. So I think festivals and that sort of programming also imparts a huge character. So if public places are built in a manner of way in which people are able to use it for community celebrations, it automatically would create an emotional connect. I mean, that's a very, very simple hack, I would assume. So if you're building a park, let's not build it in a way which is, manicured and, keep off the grass and do this and that as well. But design it in a way that, every community can come and celebrate its own festival over here.
And Roshni, what about you? What are some of the ways that you bring the emotional connect into that space?
So what I mean, I think Sarah's covered a lot of ground there. One thing I think more than the emotion, like Sarah is more about bringing the community and emotional connect, and I agree completely with that. But there's also, I feel there's a giant gap right now in public policy and and the reality of what's happening. Because
Mm-hmm.
simple things like if you see in South Bombay, Rampart Row, the reason why it looks a certain way it currently does. And I always used to wonder कि how abroad में कैसे ऐसा अच्छा लगता है सबको जहाँ पे क्यों नहीं होता है, right? Like I'm like,
Right,
how is
right,
it's not like they are some great, even the people, there are uneducated people even there. There are people who are poor, there are, beggars, everything. There's poverty and everything everywhere. And I then realized that there are councils in the government, there are design councils whose only job, and every area has a design council whose job is to make sure that the aesthetic of that area remains. That means you can't put West Side ka logo on an old heritage building. You cannot put that
right.
Bank of Baroda cannot pull up the whole building with that kind of they do
Mm-hmm.
create branding. There are rules, and those rules, and that's real place branding, I would say, because that goes into practicality of how to actually roll things out. Because no matter what you do, there will always
Right,
be a commercial side of things, but somebody has to stand there and say this is approved, that is not approved. As simple as that. And that doesn't mean you don't have commerce, you don't have malls, you don't have
right,
international
right.
brand, but there has to be somebody taking those decisions, which is why same thing with signage systems in India, right? Like that, if you look at the signages in I mean, I'm speaking very Bombay centric, but I'm sure, I mean, I know it's true everywhere else.
Right.
You'll be in Ghatkopar or you'll be in like Kandivali, and it will say straight ahead for Mantralaya, and I'm like, Mantralaya
Yeah.
is not even in this ballpark, right? And
Right,
it's the
right.
packages are completely there just for, I don't know why. Maybe somebody paid the road guy, so they 100 signages banana hai, to bana diya. There was no
Yeah.
thought, nothing.
Very true.
So I think for us, I mean, definitely the public stuff should happen, and I think a lot of private sector is doing that. A lot of restaurants, a lot of great festivals and art festivals, and those things are already happening, and people are really trying. But I think until the government or people in the tourism board or whatever really pushes back and says, listen, we are saying incredible India, but when people are coming to India, they're not seeing anything incredible here. So how do we bridge that gap, right? There are old plaques where there are beautiful pura history likha hai वगैरह. This was
Mm-hmm.
opened by Jamshedji Tata, whatever. Niche there's a lady sitting and selling her whatever flowers, and she spat on that and she's hung her stuff on that plaque. It's gone. Like, so I think huge conversations about also maintenance,
Right.
emotional connect, yes, but I think emotional connect is also, people should feel that emotional connect with these spaces, and I think that will come if we give it respect and rules are created, and if the government or the sort of authorities kind of treat it as sacrosanct. And I think especially I feel like in
So
Gujarat
so
they've
let's go a little bit deeper into this in the sense that now I think you've named a number of things that could potentially make a place iconic. Like you've listed out a lot of things that should be done. Could you guys maybe talk about, like, okay, if a place has to be considered iconic, what are all those things that we need to have happen in that space to make it iconic?
I
And
think
maybe you
exactly
guys could
that question
take
here.
you could probably take any example, like, Saurav, if you talk about the VR mall, that would be one great case study of how you made that place iconic for Surat. I mean, I know that it's brought about a huge revival in Surat's fortunes. A lot of people love it. They say this is the place where we're just gonna go hang out all the time. And maybe Roshan, you could pick an example of yours where you managed to really transform a space and make that kind of iconic in your own way. Roy, if you want to go first, that would be great.
So I think the first recipe, the ingredient for something being iconic is originality. I think, as
Mm.
a process, if, sort of everyone is geared towards, let's create something which is truly original and sort of depicts us or the place or its context, I think that sort of works really well. And a lot of it, apart from obviously, and I really see that design is one small part of it. It obviously, to build something into iconic requires a huge amount of work by a huge bunch of people. So the process then also sort of becomes really important, that how do you sort of do a process? And to me, really sort of placemaking in that sense, sort of really when I first learned of the word and, the entire aspect of placemaking as well, and this was quite some time back, around almost 10 years ago. To me, really, placemaking sort of gave a cue about an interesting kind of process which ties down right at the project conceptualization level to the execution, delivery, and activation as well. And that to me is sort of the importance of placemaking. That there's one singular thread which makes sure that when something is being thought of, it's been thought of in the right way, and it's also
Mhm.
delivered and activated in the right way as well. And all of this then sort of contributes to helping build something sort of truly iconic. And I think uh, all of these places, whether it's Surat, and there are so many different examples also across India as well, where there's a tremendous amount of work which is happening as well. But given obviously the size of our country and the kind of place that we
Mhm.
have, there is a lot to do. But I think it also means there's tremendous amounts of opportunities for everyone as well.
Super. Roshni, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about some place that you made iconic using various elements? And it'll be really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, I think what is especially in India, I think iconic is a few things that make something iconic, right? Either it's the food of a place, right? That one more thing.
Mhm.
Okay, Surat ka ye important, Kanpur ka ye yaad hai, or it's like craftsmanship, right? There is Kanjivaram saris, or this from Calicut, or the boat race. So and I think that's, and all its events like festivals, so how to, I think nobody can really mm, deliberately make something iconic, but you can
Mhm.
keep hitting that arrow there. Keep, and I
Right.
completely agree with Saurabh that it has to be something authentic, like original and
Right.
authentic. If you do something authentic, which is like only you can do it there, right? Only your Patan can make your the Patan saris, right? Um, if you can keep like those centers and sort of help them really in not generic, make it generic, right? So the patola
Mhm.
coming, and there is a whole history, there's a king who used to, there's a like all of that. Now to take that storytelling, then take the like take the craftsmen, bring them to a place which is beautiful, which is celebrating all the patola saris, have a museum, get them there, then get people to come and visit it. You do all of these things, have people to come and easily consume it, maybe create a festival around it, maybe create a time of the year that you can get the best patola saris, whatever. You kind of narrow it down to make it celebrated. And I think that can make something iconic, because there's so many such things around India that you can just like have it in a season. Like there's, I don't know, there's certain even vegetables. Like there's
Yeah.
something called pork that you get in Surat, which only there in this month,
Yeah.
right? And they have
Right.
pork,
Right.
like pork parties, which is so interesting. Now, suppose you get pork all throughout the year, that magic will go away. You get strawberries in Mahabaleshwar certain time. So now, how do you make that strawberry culture iconic? That's what Mapro does, right? Mapro during February has that whole
Mhm.
thing, and now it's become
Mhm.
iconic. So it's about taking,
Right.
specific things, yeah, and celebrating
So,
them.
so let's finally end with some easy tools that we can give the audience for placemaking. And this is like asking you all to reveal your box of secrets. So, Saurav, do you have your slide ready on your 5 simple hacks or your 5 simple tools that you can use for placemaking?
Yeah, I can just run it through as well, so instead of sort of doing a
Okay.
presentation. So, to me, one of the most important hack is the process itself, because the process has to be an inclusive process. In order to create a great place, you need to have the right bunch of people in the entire process, right from the point A. So, which
Right.
means that let's take for example the case of a mall. Typically you would need to have the projects guy, the consultants, as well as the marketing and the activation guys involved in the process right from beginning, even before the place is built, because that's when you're able to sort of understand that all the different aspects as well.
Mm-hmm.
For obviously a public place, this sort of group becomes much wider, because you would sort of need to involve a whole lot of different people and people into this entire process as well.
True. True.
And so the process to me is obviously the first hack. Without the right process, it ends up being a little superficial in that sense. The second is what we discussed so much about, is about connect with that local community. That the
Mm-hmm.
context is context. It's really really sort of important, and it's not a theme. It's not creating or what we are typically given as briefs. Create selfie points. It's really sort of about creating something which makes sense to the kind of place it is. And one of the tools through which you can do is signage and wayfinding is probably one of the simplest of the tools. The
Right.
other is festivals and programming, because that really sort of ends up becoming an activation of the place. Because while obviously you create a brand and you create all of that as well, but the way the place is lived through, or the culture is lived through, is through the actual activation. It's how people sort of would interact within that space itself. And art programs in that sense also are a very great way to sort of involve this. And I think there's tremendous amount of, especially art programs in India, which are, sort of now it's blossoming all across India, right? From whether it's street art or to sort of, art
Mm-hmm.
of the art in
Yes,
open
that's so true.
galleries and
Yeah.
in public places and galleries like that. I think there's a huge way it sort of adds to the character. And lastly, my favorite is F&B. I mean, food and beverage to that sense. Any kind of place that you're building in, and an interesting example
Yeah. If there's a
is
chaat wala at the corner, that place automatically becomes iconic, I feel.
yeah. So an interesting place is, I mean, earlier when I was living in Bombay, in the back road of Lokhandwala, they had just widened the road, and that's literally all the thing that they had done as an effort. They had just widened the road and made it clean.
Yeah.
In a matter of few weeks, you would see people walking. It sort of became a very nice active place, because literally that was the only walkable street in the area that we were living in, where you could walk around without getting run over cars.
Yeah.
And eventually we started seeing, I started seeing, literally every day that now there's a sabzi wala there, there's a chaat guy there. So early morning and you start seeing a pattern emerge. So early morning with the joggers, you would have one range of vendors who would start selling fruit juice to things like that. Afternoon
Hmm.
would be something else, evening would be something else. So there is a huge amount of organic sense of place, which in India it sort of grows automatically as well. And that's,
Yeah.
in a sense, to me, is really what the function of a place is to be, is to sort of create that environment where this organic, wonderful, chaotic mix of India can happen, but it can happen well. It doesn't need to
Right.
happen in
Right.
a way that it ends up being either dirty or people climbing on top of each other. But sort of if the places are just little bit thoughtfully designed, I think it just sort of, we are all starved for that, I think, in India.
That's very true. Roshni, what about you? What are your 5 hacks for placemaking?
I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Is it showing?
No, I don't think so. Not yet.
Oh, there we
It's
are.
coming.
Yeah,
It's
it's
coming.
good.
No, it's coming. It's coming. Yeah.
Sorry. Huh. So I think more than hacks, I think there were just some ideas I thought about, because I'm saying, okay, I'm talking to a session of placemakers. And I just think every time I think about what we can do with India, I just light up. They're like, these are 5, I have 100, right? So the first one I would say is to enhance the experience of tour guides at famous monuments. Like, if you go to, say, your Rajasthan typical Udaipur fort, the same guy will tell you the same thing for like 10 years. You come go back 10 years later, again, he's going to tell you the same story. But how can we like maybe update his knowledge? Secondly, give him like fun tools and games and activities so that tourists can, sort of really experience the place. Like, close your eyes now, imagine this, now imagine the like, Ranis coming from here, right? And I think just rather, like educating them and making their whole experience an interactive one, which would be so great, right? So one is that, like, look, just simple thing as tour guides, and making them, because they are the guys who really, especially if you're looking at tourism, when foreigners come in, they're the people they meet, right? So they are actually our sort of point of contacts. They are our brand touch points, as we call it. So that's a nice point. Second is, I was thinking, if in smaller areas where it's not the Rajasthans of the world, but like smaller towns, smaller villages, tiny places of interests, right? Could the local school kids, sort of adopt that neighborhood and become the custodians, become the tour guides of that place? And I would, what we could also do is do things like, of course, create local walks, and they could create artworks, but they also adopt a place, so that school adopts that neighborhood, of course, cleans it up, makes sure it's clean, yells at anybody else who's littering it because they have spent their time cleaning it. Also create festivals and art workshops, and and then they are the ones who tell you about the local stories there, which are factually correct. So also that becomes a great education thing, because I think kids today just don't have that connection with the place around them, right? They just go to school, come back, go to tuition. There is no immersion where they are, and I think that's why a lot of people migrate from where they are. Number three is to install also, sorry, the sense of pride, right? Like the younger, as we talk about generations taking this on, right? Like the younger citizens of India need to kind of have that sense of pride. What we have probably not good enough. Number three is to sort of install simple plaques around the area. Just give you facts and history and trivia and like who lived here. Just information like did you know Gandhiji spent like 10 days in here doing this, for example, whatever. It just makes a place come alive with little storytelling, and that is literally storytelling. Like this is sort of what Saurav was talking about, signage systems. So of course you have signage systems, but also why not have little signage just telling you a little story about the place. Fourth is this idea of having small scale local festivals. So everything doesn't have to be Ganesh Chaturthi or a big, Onam festival. It can be tiny, tiny little things that we celebrate around seasonal foods, like I was mentioning, or little cultures or storytelling there. And the fifth is, as I was earlier mentioning, a public space maintenance committee. We really, even if, say, the government doesn't do it, can we get local neighborhoods to create committees which make sure that certain areas, stay the way they are? And just simple things like have penalties, yeah. When people vandalize properties, have somebody, hawkers just come with the no hawker zone existing niche, like they're scraping off on ancient 1,000-year architecture. Like what is going on, right? So why not? And then having maybe a special policing that to enforce all these things. I know it's a lot of work for the normal police to do this. Can't the tourism board take this on and say, okay, we are going to make sure that none of the touristic places, all of them have a policing system, right? And even for new monuments that are getting created, right, there needs to be a stricter civic education for people. So yeah, I think these are the 5 sort of thoughts that I had.
And Saurav. And now I'd like to open up the field for questions. So if you all could leave your comments and questions in the comment box in whichever, I think it's on Facebook, then I can start asking them. So let me see. There are a few that have been already sent in, and I'll just ask you guys. So let me start. So here's a question for Roshni from a gentleman named Sham Sundar. That if we were to build Indian regional brands from scratch with form plus function and new addition of culture, what is the best way to go about it? Is it more on the research and development rather than just following a questionnaire that we give out to the client to fill?
No, it has a lot of research. You better be deep dove into the research before you talk about that space, because you should ideally be speaking to the archaeologists, to writers, to people who live in that space, to of course families that have lived there for hundreds of generations. You should probably know more about that space than they do, and then create a holistic brand about it. Then, because then you're doing justice. Otherwise it's just going to be a surface level, like a
right,
makeup on that place. Yeah.
Now here's a question that Roy can take, which is that we haven't, YK Naidu has written that we have such an incredible history, but we are not good at the packaging. What do you think we are missing? This, I think, is a very deep and profound one. It's really
I think
interesting.
we're just missing telling the story clearly. I mean, all of us, we know our history, we know our stories, etc., which are there. What we're missing is actually the experience, because we do know the
Right.
history in terms of what we read, but when you reach the monument, I think we all face our kind of Paris syndromes, right? So like Taj Mahal, for example, you see these beautiful shots, but you come out of Taj Mahal and see the area around it. I mean, I don't think that's depicted in the images so clearly. So what's really
Yeah.
missing is the experience, because it's not enough to just sort of make a gate and just sort of do basic maintenance. You have to think of the larger experience also as well. And a lot of these are very important for the communities simply because tourism is an industry. It creates employability. It creates a huge amount of inflow of
Very true.
monies into the local economy. So by not creating the experience, it's ultimately a loss for the local municipality as well as the community and the country in general. And it's interestingly telling, like for example, a place like Dubai gets more tourists than a place like India. And the fact that we have such a huge, I can't even begin to count the number of kind of places and experiences that we can sort of do if it's managed well over here.
Lovely. So I think with that, we've run out of time. We've already gone 15 minutes over the scheduled time. But I think it was well worth it. Every minute spent was well worth it. And thank you so much, Saurav and Roshni. And looking forward to getting a lot more placemaking done in India. And hopefully the next generation will see a totally transformed country.
Thank you, Firdaus, for being the moderator and I think leading the discussion.
Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. I think if I could stop making tiles, I would get into placemaking now.
You're doing so
I don't
much.
know. I actually don't control this StreamYard, so I don't know how we. I think Dimple has to come back.
How do we get out of here? We're stuck in this box.
Yeah, Dimple,
Yeah, I would like to thank all of you for a wonderful session and looking forward to interacting more in the coming months with all of you on placemaking. Yeah, so thank you so much on behalf of Jamiti. Thank you.
And thank you everyone who's come and attended and seen us. Hope you guys got something exciting to take away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.